even if you only have 100 people listening to your podcast or you have just 50 people on your email list, before you ever want to approach sponsors, we want to know, is this an active list? And so we want to invite people first to jump on a 15-minute call with you to talk through just some ideas that you have. So then say you get, 10 to 20 people that are on this call. You're going to ask them three questions. The first one is going to be around the pain. The second one's going to be around the product. And the third one's going to be around the price. Now, what this does is this then shows us, do these people actually want to buy something?
Are you not getting the downloads you desire? Unsure about how to promote your podcast effectively? Or struggling to monetize your work? Well, you've just found the resource you need. Hi and welcome to Mics to Millions, the podcast that brings you exclusive, in-depth conversations with top-tier hosts in the health and wellness industry to help you grow your podcast. I'm your host, Sam Breakgear, co-founder of PodWritten, a podcast booking agency for health and wellness businesses. In every episode, we dive deep into what it really takes to get more podcast listeners, successfully promote your show, and monetize your work. Remember, if you like the show, please leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. This helps us grow, and in doing so, we can continue to offer you valuable insights and podcast growth tips. Now, let's get into it. My guest today is the host of the Practice podcast, a podcast that covers everything it takes to make a service-based private practice more awesome. The show shares insights such as how to grow referrals, save tons of money, and have some fun along the way. It's been running since January 2013. It's close to hitting 1,000 episodes and receives roughly 60,000 to 100,000 monthly listeners. He's the author of Thursday is the New Friday, How to Work Fewer Hours, Make More Money, and Spend Time Doing What You Want. It examines how the 4-day work week boosts creativity and productivity. He's been featured on Forbes, Good Magazine, and the Smart Passive Income podcast. Joe Sanok, welcome to the show.
Well, Sam, thank you so much for having me.
Well, I'm really pleased to have you here, and I really want to kick the show off with quite a meaty question. What do you consider to be your greatest success in podcasting?
Greatest success in podcasting. You know, I would actually say that it's what podcasting has given me, and it's given me success to be able to be the father, the friend, the person that I want to be. That it's taken me out of so much of the hustle culture of the world, and I get to show up and interview people that I enjoy and learn from, conversations I probably would want to have anyway, and I get to kind of give that to the world while also creating a life that, I'm a single dad with, sole physical custody of my kids. And so I get to show up for them. I get to, chaperone things. I get to make them lunches and I'm not stressed out and burned out. And so I think it's kind of like a two-sided thing where I get to help a community of people that really need a lot of help and have interesting conversations while also getting to be the kind of person that feels healthiest in the world.
That's fantastic. Well, it's wonderful to hear that you've been able to achieve a sense of freedom that so many of us desire. And I'm sure so many of our listeners desire as well, hence why they're listening to this podcast. And I'd love to take it really back to the beginning. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the Practice of the Practice first launched as a blog in 2012, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So I had a counseling practice at the time that I sold in 2019 called Mental Wellness Counseling. And initially, it was just a side gig counseling practice. I was working full time first as a foster care supervisor, then as a therapist at a local community college. And during that time, I started this side gig counseling practice and just realized I had no idea what I was doing business wise. That I'd learned a lot of clinical things in graduate school, but I'd never learned profit and loss. I'd never learned anything on marketing or website design or SEO. And I was listening to all these business podcasts, just helping me learn just the very basics of running a business. And I realized that there were no podcasts out there at all about the business side of running a private practice. And so I thought, well, from day one, I guess I'll be the number one podcast for counselors in private practice. So I launched this podcast after I had been blogging for about 6 months and it was well received, and really viewed both the blog and the podcast as being co-learning. That selfishly, I could interview people that usually would charge a premium for their consulting and wouldn't have to pay them. So I could have SEO experts, I could have website experts, I could ask all the questions that I just needed to know for my business that usually you'd have to pay someone for. And I bet the first 50 episodes were mostly around just my own inquisitive learning.
Yeah, I can imagine like you're not the only one in those situations. So I can imagine that the people tuning in are just like yourself. they all have the same questions, and it's a learning experience for both of you. So it's really two birds, one stone in that case.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that when I got started, I did a lot of really practical ways to both build the podcast and the blog. One of them was that I was in a bunch of LinkedIn groups, and most of those groups, have rules against self promotion. So they say like, don't just spam us with your blog posts. But most of them had rules that if you're answering somebody's question, that you could then post a helpful link there. So I'd go in there and I would see questions that I could answer that also didn't have a lot of comments. And I would go write a blog post about that, answering the question. So if someone said, how do you name a counseling private practice? Like, what are techniques? Rather than give a thoughtful response within that group, I would go write a 500 to 1,000 word blog post and say, hey, actually, today I just wrote a blog post about how to name your practice. Here's the link to it. And that was a great way to test out blog posts to then see which ones of those would be good podcast episodes.
That sounds like a really smart approach. And since you started your show so long ago, back in 2013, that's over 10 years now. How have you seen the podcast landscape change from when you started to where it is now?
Yeah, I think that I've seen some really interesting trends and bubbles happen where when I jumped in, it felt like I was late to the game because there were so many people I respected and followed at that point. But I think that, especially when we look at during the pandemic, a lot of people were just throwing spaghetti at the wall. They were bored, they were at their home, they'd always wanted to do a podcast. And so we saw a huge uptick in podcasts, during 2020. And then almost to the day, March of 21, we see that the podcasting just drops off. That after people had put a year into it, and they're just like, forget it. And so I think we saw bubbles like that. I think that right now, a trend that I'm noticing that has really shifted is that it's less following a typical here's how you do a podcast, and people are really finding their own voice and saying, am I really into short form doing, 5 to 10 minutes? Am I really into doing really creative narrative? Am I interested in doing improv or comedy? And I think that the kind of typical information interview based podcast is still valuable. It's still great when you have someone like yourself that has a very clear personality, a very clear perspective. That interviewer is really what makes that podcast successful. But then we're seeing all sorts of weird different kinds of podcasts that are just kind of breaking the genre, and I think that's just interesting to see how people are experimenting with it.
Yeah, it definitely demands more creativity from the creator in order to actually leave your mark or do something different. And I really like what's coming from podcasting at the moment for that reason. It's cool to see how people go above and beyond with their concepts rather than just like an interview show.
I think we're also seeing one side of it. I went to like Podfest and Podcast Movement, a number of different conferences over the years, and to see early on how it was a lot of these, kind of just gritty podcasters like you and me that were, trying to make a show and doing it. And then now we see ESPN and HBO, like every TV show you watch, that channel now has a podcast that goes along with it. And so we see that there's a lot of these people that are already kind of famous jumping into the podcast world, and I think it's harder and harder to stand out than maybe it was 5 or 10 years ago, when it was more just your content, what people were looking for. Now there's just a lot of corporate money that's gone into this genre.
Yeah, that as someone that's been paying close attention to the podcast scene myself, I've seen a lot more money come in. It's no longer just like the grassroots folks that just grab a mic and do it. But it'll be interesting to see how that develops. I did want to take it back to the start of your podcasting journey because it sounds like you have some really creative ways of promoting the show. I'd like to know, like, how did you reach your first 10,000 listeners? And do you remember how long it took you?
Yeah, I think it probably took me about 2 years. At the beginning, I would do the podcast when I felt like it. So I might do 3 episodes a month. Some months I might do two, others I might do five. Sometimes I do 5 episodes in a row in a week. There was no rhyme or reason to how often I was posting. And when I decided to upgrade the website to just make it not look like this WordPress theme I had installed, and I decided every single Tuesday morning I'm going to post an episode no matter what. That's when the numbers really started to be doubling and tripling. And I looked at my website. I looked at the analytics to see when were people on the website. and Wednesdays were the most busy day for some reason on the website, and I couldn't really figure out why. But I thought if I just post my podcast the day before that, maybe I'll drive some extra traffic to the website. Maybe I'll get people interested throughout the week instead of just on Wednesdays. And when we still do Tuesday mornings, but then we now do 3 episodes a week. Once in a while, we'll do 4 episodes a week. But really, just start Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, kicking out content.
Wow, that is a lot of content to put out. I really want to get into how you grew from there. Like, what were the steps to think, like, all right, let's put out more, more, and more? Do you remember the process?
Yeah, so I think it was concurrent with thinking about podcast sponsorship. And so one thing about a podcast is, sometimes people say, "Oh, I want to reach the masses." Well, that's great, but the cost per mil that people are going to pay, per 1,000 listens is like $30. So for you to make any money off of a podcast, you got to have, 10,000, 100,000 listens per episode to really make any sort of money. Of course, there's ways like affiliate links and your own products and things like that. But when you're in a niche podcast, so for me, I help therapists. Their hourly rate is anywhere between 125 and $400 an hour. And so if I can save them time and money, they're going to buy into that. And there's tons of products like electronic health records or website development, SEO for therapists, all sorts of things like that. That they're charging $100 to $200 a month. So their lifetime value of a client may be 30 grand. So if they drop 50 grand in a year on podcast sponsorship, that then allows them to get all these other people. So if we go back to your question, I started at the beginning charging an astronomical amount per episode because I knew I had 100% of those ideal clients for these companies. And so by being able to reach out and have at least half of those initial episodes, so that'd be 26 of the 52 episodes covered at around $1,000 an episode, that then made it a lot easier to say, now I'm going to upgrade into hiring a team. And to me, that's the first step that really helped me scale. So early on, I was doing all the audio engineering. I was designing every image in Canva, which when you're bootstrapping it and it's a side gig, it's like, yeah, I don't want to spend 100 or $200 an episode to have this automated. But then, when I did start to outsource that, I really enjoyed the Canva and doing all the design stuff, and it filled something artistically in me. But, I do a 30-minute interview. It would take me 2 hours to do all the audio engineering, all the posting on social media, all the images, all the scheduling, coordinating with guests. So, in that 2.5 hours, I could get one episode done. Now, and this is kind of jumping ahead, I do the interview, I put it into our shared document, and I'm done, and so then the team takes it over. And so I think early investment into some automations. Now, there's always that push and pull of you're just getting started. How much do you bootstrap? How much do you take out into and take that money into your family versus put it back in? But even just having someone to start doing some of the images or start doing a little bit of the audio engineering. When I first got started, I realized that our local community college has a sound engineering program. These are 19, 20-year-olds that they want to go into the world. And some of my sound engineers now work in Nashville. They work on Broadway. I had them when they were interns and they got paid for their internship, unlike most other, internships. And then they'd stay with me a couple years and do audio engineering, or, as they entered the workforce, they might say, "Oh yeah, I'll do, a couple hours a week still for 20 bucks an hour." And so there's lots of ways that even if you're not going to work with a company like us or like you or lots of the other companies that are out there that can help you in different ways, that finding a virtual assistant, even if it's just 1 or 2 hours a week, just helps you start to multiply your time and to get into that habit that you're building a business. You're not building a job for yourself.
Hmm. That is so wise what you said about taking on interns and like paid interns. You found yourself, it seems like, in quite a good position to work with those folk. But if someone is listening and they're like, you know what, I'd like to take on a paid intern or find people that are in a similar situation as you mentioned, who are quite early on in their career, do you have any advice for them?
Yeah, I always advise my consulting clients to just start with a love hate list. So, a love hate list is just what are the parts of your week that you absolutely love in your business and in your life? And what are the parts that you absolutely hate? Those things that you hate are draining energy from you. So, for me, I realize, I live in northern Michigan. We get snow like 9 months a year. And so, clearing snow from my driveway, it takes like an hour and a half. And after a busy day, I would rather hang out with my daughters than, go clear snow from the driveway. And so for 30 bucks a plow, I have someone that comes and they just plow it when it's above 3 inches of snow. And even those little personal things like that, that then free up energy into other areas. I think also thinking about and this is from the book, The One Thing, like what's the one thing that's going to make everything else easier? And so for me early on, it was okay, I've got 500 to 1,000 listens per episode. If I could even just get 200 of them onto an email list, then I could start to really think through what kind of products I could offer to take them to that next step. And so then what kind of email list would people want? Well, people don't like email lists. They like email courses. And so we developed a whole framework for an email course that people opted into. And then the next thing was, well, if I could just get one or two consulting clients that were twice the price of my counseling. So my counseling, I think at the time was 150. So my consulting at that time was $300 an hour. So if I could just get a handful of those. And then the next year it was, okay, I've got, 5 or 10 of these consulting clients. What would be that next step? Like a mastermind group. If I could have people, like 6 people paying $200 per hour to be in a mastermind group that's offering value, stepping into that. And so we just keep doing that. So then we launched a membership community. And so the idea of starting somewhere and then saying, well, what would the upsell be and what would the downsell? When you start to then monetize the podcast, it allows you to then reinvest in your team, reinvest in your quality, and then it just becomes more and more scalable over time.
Hmm. Now, you seem to have gone in a very kind of linear path of like working your way through these monetization steps. If someone's listening and maybe they're not quite at the stage yet where they've managed to earn money from their podcast, what would you suggest as the first step? And maybe they're feeling overwhelmed and thinking, do I do sponsorship, or maybe I'm not going to get much money from that? And yeah, what would you suggest they start out with?
Yeah, so there's a thing we call the 3 questions to ask process, that I talk about it in Thursday is the new Friday more in depth. But there's 3 questions. Sometimes some people also call it the 3P process because we just each one starts with a P. Even if you only have 100 people listening to your podcast or you have just 50 people on your email list, before you ever want to approach sponsors, we want to know, is this an active list? And are these people that are listening, like, do they actually care about what I'm saying? And so we want to invite people first to jump on a 15-minute call with you to talk through just some ideas that you have. And so what this might look like is on your podcast, maybe the next 3 to 5 episodes, you say, hey, everybody, I'm thinking about maybe launching some products or doing some sponsor stuff. I know you are dedicated listeners. You are the cream of the crop. You've been listening since the beginning. So you're really like building them up. I want to talk to you. This is not a sales call. It's literally 15 minutes of me just asking questions about how you think and what kind of things you might want me to go after. Head on over to my website.com/talk. That'll go to a calendar link where you can pick 15 minutes for us to chat. So then that first step is and you also would send this out in an email form to your email list. So then do people even schedule? If nobody schedules, then you have a list and listeners that they listen, but they're not active. So you don't want to take on sponsors. You don't want to launch products if nobody even responds to a free inquiry call. So then say you get, 10 to 20 people that are on this call. You're going to ask them 3 questions. The first one is going to be around the pain. The second one's going to be around the product, and the third one's going to be around the price. So, say you have a podcast about how to start podcasts. You say to somebody, what's it been like starting a podcast? And you hear that pain. You ask them questions. They say, I just feel so confused with the tech. I feel confused with show notes and transcriptions, and so they're going through all the pain of what it's like to start a new podcast. Then you're going to reflect back what they just said. So you just said that it's been really confusing. You said that you didn't know where to outsource or some of the tech. Imagine there was a product that helped you with that. What would that look like? What would your dream product be if you were designing it to help you? And they may not know what to say. So you might say, would it involve like one-on-one coaching? Would it involve, kind of an at your pace program? Would it be some sort of done for you service? And so they may need a little bit of help in regards to talking through that product. And then we're going to reflect back that pain. So you had said this was the pain of starting a podcast. You had designed this product. Say that product did exist. What would you pay for that? And they might say, oh, I'd pay $59 a month for that if it was a subscription, or, one time done for you. Oh, man, I'd pay 2 grand for that. And you're keeping track of all these things. But the last question, that's the magical one, is say I doubled that price. What would have to be included in that? So say they said for 2 grand, if you did that done for you that I just designed, that would be amazing. If you said back to them, all right, imagine that was 4 grand. What would have to be included in that to give you the value to make that a no-brainer buying decision. That's where you really find out what they care about. And so they may say, man, if I just got like 3 hours to talk with you, if I got stuck, I'd totally pay 2 grand more. Now we have a framework after talking to 10 or 20 of your best listeners, your most ideal email subscribers of a potential product. Now, even with just 50 to 100 people on an email list or listening, you can then test out whether or not they actually do want to buy. So, say you find out that there's a done for you thing that you can offer at 500 bucks a pop, you can then email those people and say, "Hey, I just interviewed a bunch of you. Here's the pain that you talked about. Here's the product that you helped design, and here's the price. We're going to be offering this for 750 moving forward. But if you want to grab this, we have 10 spots at 500 bucks. Click here to sign up." Now, what this does is this then shows us, do these people actually want to buy something? Are they motivated? And that then allows you to know, I have an audience that is excited, they want to go after things they're purchasing. Now, if you go to a potential affiliate or you go to a potential sponsor, you can say, we've already done, $5,000 in sales internally with just an email and a couple phone calls. So I'm confident that your sponsorship is going to be well served.
That's fantastic. Joe, I have to say, this knowledge that you're sharing, it's gold dust. I particularly love this paying product price. That's such an easy way of breaking it down. And it's really smart because I feel that sometimes podcasting doesn't always have that high level of two-way engagement that you might sometimes get with other forms of content, like maybe social media or a webinar. So I think this is a really smart way of making podcasting very kind of engaging with your audience and getting some feedback as well.
Yeah. And I think it also stops you from leaving money on the table. When we were launching Podcast Launch School, I was picturing, a bunch of these therapists wanting to start a podcast from this therapeutic perspective. They're super smart people that their knowledge needs to get out in the world, in my opinion. And so I reached out to our top 20 highest paying consulting clients that had come to micro conferences. They had spent, 10 to 20 grand in just one-on-one consulting and went through this exact process with them, and they were, all wanting to do something to become influencers and get out into the world. And I was totally picturing like $1,000 e-course was what they wanted. And person after person said, I am so busy with my counseling practice. I don't have time to learn tech. Joe, you have a team that does all this. Honestly, I would just pay you if I could show up and record and then just have it done for me. And then when I got to the price, I'm like, they're going to be cheap around this. How much would you pay if we helped you launch, say, 26 episodes? Over and over, it came in between $18,000 and $25,000. And so I didn't have extra sound engineers. I didn't have extra show notes people, but I then sent out an email and said, we're going to take on 4 spots at 20K each. You got to put down a $10,000 deposit now, and in 3 months, another 10K will come out, and we're going to launch your podcast. And within 3 hours, I had all 4 spots filled. So I would have left so much money on the table, and then I knew that they were committed. So that's when I reached out to, the sound engineering at the community college to get more interns and, to really create a team. I've got 40K in capital right now to help launch these podcasts. And so oftentimes we don't even realize the products that our listeners want until we talk to them.
Yeah, that's a really smart way of doing things. I love this. I want to talk a little bit about your guests because I know that we've worked together in the past, or at least I've come to know you and your show because we put you in contact with some guests before. I'm curious, how do you choose your guests and make sure they're a good fit for Practice of the Practice?
Yeah. So the first line is we get pitched probably 20 people a week or more. And so we really had to create a process. And so there's certain categories of people that we just don't interview. So financial planners, there's just too much kind of scamminess in that world. And also, I think that you can do better with a whole market index fund through Vanguard for the most part than a financial planner. So unless somebody is like a really has a pitch that's very unique, or they're by the hour, we just, Jen, my assistant, knows to say, we don't accept financial planners. Same with a few other lines like, supplement companies. There's a lot of the workout space has become kind of scammy. We just want to kind of protect our audience from those people. Then if someone gets past Jen, then I review it, and she has other things she looks at. So, she'll look at their website and just say like, does their website say good branding? Does it say good quality? Is it the kind of website that we would use as an example for our listeners to say, this is a great website? Or do they look really Like they still have an AOL account. No, there are great people that still have AOL accounts. My actually my writing coach that helped me get a HarperCollins book deal, she still has an AOL account and doesn't even have a website. But the lady is brilliant. So there are people that may get through, but I want to at least know, okay, like their website is really crappy. Like what's going on here? They're saying they're a marketing influencer and their website is terrible. Like do those things line up? And then, when people are pitching, I'm just kind of looking at a few different factors. Like, what have we already covered? Have we covered that before? Do we have any series coming up where we could go through a certain lens? So, for example, around the new year, we did a new year, new habits instead of new year, new you, with the idea that habits kind of can come and go, and that we're just testing out new habits. So, it's people that we were going to interview anyway, but it was all through that lens of a series, January 1st through January 15th. It was all around kind of new year, new habits. We have a series coming up that's on psychedelic assisted therapy. And so if there's someone that comes in and pitches around that, then we'd put them into that series. Or we did a 2-month long 7-figure practice series of people that had 7-figure practices. And there was people that pitched us that didn't even know we were doing that, but they had 7-figure practices, or they did things that supported 7-figure practices. So then we can do that lens as well. So at a certain point, it just becomes, do they come across as salesy or do they not come across as salesy? I mean, to me, if someone's a hard push, they're just not going to match my audience. And after we're done with the show, if people work with somebody and that person's really like scammy and salesy and doesn't make someone feel good, like my name is associated with that. So I really, a lot of it is we have some kind of check marks, but also there's some of it that, does this just feel really salesy unnecessarily?
Yeah, it kind of gives you that gut feeling. I
Yeah.
think more than anything, you're just like you have that intuition that tells you, I don't get the good vibe from this person. So
Hmm.
I understand that, and I love what you said about the website, because I once heard the comparison that a modern day website is basically like the modern day version of a lobby or a waiting room before you have a business meeting.
Hmm.
So it's like if you are on someone's website and it looks flash and it looks nice, then it's the same as going into like a lobby or a waiting room of an office building that's nice or pleasant to be in, versus like I don't know, a dank warehouse sort of thing. But that's my own person. That's what I get from it anyway. So that makes total sense. I think it's fair to say that you can judge these factors. On a separate note, you have had some amazing guests on the Practice of the Practice, such as Pat Flynn, John Lee Demas, and Lewis Howes. Like, what is your secret for securing such big names as guests?
Yeah, each one of those is kind of like its own story. So like Lewis Howes, I knew he was connected to this guy, Rob Bell, who I had on the podcast. And, so if I know someone's connected, I'll try to gently say, hey, I know that you're friends with Lewis Howes. Any chance that Lewis could, you could make that connection? With Pat Flynn and John Lee Dumas, I was following the two of them and Chris Ducker. All three of them kind of had for a while, like the three of them would refer to each other. And I first got on Chris Ducker's podcast. He used to have this podcast called Virtual Freedom, and then he switched to Upreneur. And I was doing all this virtual assistant stuff, and he had just put something out on social media that said, hey, do you use virtual assistants? Do you have any unique stories? Send me a DM. And I sent him this DM of how I was using virtual assistants out of South Africa and, it was totally remote. And he invited me to be on the show. I still remember because he was in the Philippines at the time. I think I had to be on the show at like 10 or 11 at night. And I remember sitting in my office across town when I had a little baby, back home and just like going through this podcast in like the middle of the night. And then once I got that, then it was easier to get onto John Lee Dumas's show, and he's doing, an episode every day. So he just needs a lot of content, but still has a really good vetting process. So I was able to get on that. I had Pat on my show, but then I couldn't get onto his show for a while. But I think after I had other people that Pat knew and trusted, it was a lot easier to get Pat. Oh, I remember how I got Pat. So I recognize this was when he had just joined Instagram. His Smart Passive Income on Facebook and on Twitter was always like all the business stuff. But on Instagram, he was doing a lot of stuff around his family and things like that. And I sent him a direct video because I did a little stalking, honestly. Like I noticed that usually mid-afternoon he was posting. And so I sent him a video mid-afternoon and said, hey, Pat, I love how much of a family guy you are. I love how like you seriously were the first podcast that I really felt captivated by. I think I was at like episode 50 or 60 at that time and said, I'm close to my 100th episode. Would love to have you, on the show as someone that was such an inspiration. And he replied like right away, said, would love to. And so then that started just like a kind of small, like stepping towards. He's been on the show, I think 2 or 3 times now. And he's had me on his show. He did an endorsement for my book. I was in his community. But I think that starting with those connections, if you're doing it totally organic, like what I just said, the other thing that I would say is it is so worth it to pay to play. And I'm not saying you just pay a guest to come on your show. For example, when John Lee Demas was launching his book, The Common Path to Uncommon Success, he and I had the same editor and publisher at HarperCollins, but we had connected outside of that. And he was doing this thing where if you bought, I think it was like 50 books, then you could be in this like private mastermind with him. And so I did that, but I have a membership community and we did a book club where I said, instead of just me getting these books, can we have them sent directly to 50 of my members and then have you come in for an hour, teach, and maybe you'll sell even more books. So he gave content to my community. We're paying him for his books, which was a big deal. Then I was in the mastermind group. And then in there, I created this connection with him. And I said to him, you're the keynote speaker at Podcast Movement. I would love to put on a happy hour drink thing with you where I just pick up the tab like 1,000 or 2,000 bucks worth of like alcohol. And then all I want is for you to just say, hey, Joe Sanok and I are putting this on together. Enjoy the drinks. You can even take credit for paying for the drinks. That $2,000 got me into so many VIP rooms. It was better than any podcast sponsorship I could have paid for. I all of a sudden had the blessing of John Lee Dumas in front of, hundreds of his followers that then wanted me on their shows. I got invited to all sorts of different, things in the evening that John just would text me. Like I still, text him and Kate about different things, but it started with, I value that you are a business person and I want to add value in a way that actually stands out differently than just taking and saying, be on my show, be on my show.
Yeah, I mean, the steps you've taken there are so smart. First of all, it's really wonderful to hear that a lot of these connections came from podcasting because I am such an advocate for podcasting being a fantastic way of expanding your network. And the fact that that's happened here with you is wonderful to hear. And I also have to say that pay to play, it's something that we're somewhat on the fence about because it can go either way, like from our experience, or not even from our experience, but just from like having known like the podcasting world. There's a lot of people out there that will look to try and take and maybe not give as much back. So you pay them and you don't really get the proper ROI for what you're paying.
Mm-hmm.
However, given the examples you gave there, that seems like quite unconventional. Your strategy, I have to say, is really smart. It's not the conventional, I pay this and then I get something back. What you've done is like, I pay this, then this value gets spread across like here, and then it comes back to me through this way. So there's multiple levels to it rather than just like, I pay a chunk of money, I get something back.
Right.
So I think that this pay to play that you've suggested here, it sounds like a fantastic ROI.
Yeah, and just to be clear, we've never paid for a guest to be on the show. So to me, where I pay is, like I wanted to genuinely see what Pat Flynn's community was like. So I joined that for 6 months or a year, was active in it, provided value without being like, come listen to my podcast. But, was involved in the small groups and saw how they ran things and was really impressed with a lot of things. And then it's a lot easier to say, hey, Pat, you want to come on my show? I'm, a member of your community. He's going to just think differently about me than if I was just some rando that was reaching out. Or, for a while, we have our Ask the Expert where we bring in experts every month into our membership community. And, we would pay those people $1,000 to $3,000 for their hour because these are people that get keynotes for 20, 30K. And so if I'm going to say, show up for a Ask Me Anything for an hour, you don't have to prep any slides or anything, but that's still your time that you're giving. And so then, you bring someone into your community and these people are, paying $100 to $200 a month to be in this community. And, we have 300 or 400 people. So we can afford to pay $1,000 for an hour of somebody's time. But then that allows me access to that person in a different way because I've brought them into an event that they really enjoyed, that they felt really respected. They thought it was worth it to just show up and get paid. So then that creates a mutual, I trust you as a professional and I'm not just taking from you. But it's also not saying if I do this, if I pay you, and this is exactly, Sam, what you were saying, then you're gonna post on social media or you're gonna then do all these other things. It's definitely a, hey, I just want to be in your field of vision. And I know either way, if I pay you $1,000, you're gonna provide amazing value to my audience. And if that's where it ends, then okay, that's great. If that's not where it ends, maybe there's other things we can do together also.
Yeah, it can be very much a win-win. And I really love the fact that you don't have this huge, strong attachment. The fact that you are able to like walk away. It's more of a curiosity. It's like, okay, I'm willing to go down this road and see where it leads me. Where do you host the practice of the practice, and why did you pick this platform?
We started hosting on Libsyn at the beginning, and honestly, it was just, Pat Flynn had a free podcast course that we went through, I went through back in 2012 before we launched, and Libsyn worked well with all of our WordPress website, and it's continued to work well. And at this point, it's not been one of those things where there's anything else that stands out enough to say it's worth switching over everything, to potentially have some tech snafu. So it's been one of those things that there's a lot of great hosting out there. Like I don't even know what I would pick if I started right now. And there's been some things with Libsyn that I've said, they definitely need to improve on. But at this point, it's just we know that it works well. Our team is trained in it, and I show up, I do my recording, and then it goes live when it goes live.
Yeah. No, well, I love asking this question to all the hosts because it's something that I find very curious. And reading my final question to you, I want to know you've shared so much knowledge today, and I'm so grateful for all the advice that you've given to our audience. But finally, do you have any other advice for podcasters looking to grow their audience and monetize their show?
Yeah, I can give some kind of practical tips, but one thing I want to zoom out into is something I haven't covered yet, and that's that our best ideas, our most creative ideas, and the things that will differentiate us most from other podcasters don't come when we're stressed out and maxed out. They come when we slow down, when we're taking a shower, when we're out for a hike, when we're driving without listening to anything. That having that slowdown to me is the core of everything I do. Now, I have a busy life. I'm a single dad, and my oldest has to get up at 6 a.m. and we're off and running doing lunches and all that stuff. So I get that there's a tendency to always be doing something because in adulthood, there's always something to do. But having boundaries around what's most important and also what allows you to be most creative, to me, that's where we want to make sure we're also spending time. So, assuming that's the case, we have these great ideas, we have this creativity. I think if you followed that 3P process we talked about, to me, then asking yourself the question, if someone doesn't want this product, because they want to move faster, what's the upsell? So say somebody doesn't want to do one-on-one consulting every other week. They want to move faster than that. Okay, what's your intensive model? What's your option for you to even fly out to work with them and make that crazy expensive? But let's have an upsell for people that want to move faster than that core product. And then on the other side, if that's too expensive, if it's too fast for someone, what's a model that's a little bit more bootstrappy, a little more self-paced, but still will give them good results? So have you maybe taken your mastermind groups and taken just the content out of those and recorded them into an e-course? Or maybe you have an e-course that people go through 12 different modules, and then once a month you have a Q&A. And so finding what's the upsell and what's the downsell, over time, you'll then have a spectrum of services where it's hard for someone to say no unless they just really don't want to spend money. If it's like, okay, I can't afford $1,000 a month for consulting. Okay, that's great. We have a one-time e-course that's going to walk you through that. And then we also have 2 group calls over 6 months that you get to attend. Oh, I don't want to do that. Oh, that's okay. Well, we have this other automated thing. So being able to have a spectrum of services for different speeds and price points over time, I think allows you then to help your audience wherever they're at.
Yeah, and I suppose that engagement is so important to refine that selection of services that you're able to offer. And it sounds like you've done a really great job of creating that like two-way engagement between your audience and also polishing off the offering of services that you have. I think it's really impressive.
Mhm. Thank you.
And finally, if people do want to keep up with the work you are doing, Joe, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, I would say the Practice of the Practice podcast is where the majority of our content is. For anyone that's looking for support in either launching a podcast or with ongoing support to have social media, sound engineering, transcripts, all of that, podcastlaunchschool.com is the best place for them to go if they're looking for some podcast support.
Fantastic. Excellent. Well, Joe, thank you for sharing the vast amount of knowledge that you have clearly collected over the past 10, 11 years in this space. It's so wonderful to be able to speak with you. And yeah, I'd highly recommend everyone go check out the Practice of the Practice and give it a 5-star rating and review wherever you get your podcast. And once again, thanks, Joe, for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for joining us today. And remember, you can find more helpful resources to grow your business with podcasting on our blog at podwritten.com and on Instagram at podwritten. You can also find a full transcript for this episode on our website, so be sure to visit podwritten.com or follow the links in the episode description. Until next time, stay healthy, happy, and successful.